They told us the fence was for weather, a temporary perimeter to keep the katabatic winds from turning equipment into shrapnel. They gave it a harmless name, Line A, and painted the posts in matte orange so they wouldn't glare on satellite. But they never said why the snow around it sounded wrong when you walked across it. They never said the wind went quiet there, like it was holding its breath. They definitely never said what would happen if you stepped over. I am saying it now because I can't keep hearing that stillness alone. You remember the day I left? You slipped a hand warmer into my glove the way a mother sneaks blessings into a lunchbox. You asked if I'd be back by Sunday's weather window, and I said yes, because I believed in schedules then. Because I still respected the polite lies we hang between ourselves and whatever waits patiently for us to stop pretending. I had been in Antarctica 6 times before. Field calibrations, gravimetry under ice, instrument rehab for a neutrino array that was always a little too prayerful in the way it malfunctioned. But that was the first time I wasn't there to fix anything that had a name. They called it a logistics survey. Cargo routes across blue ice, density checks, crevasse mapping. I signed papers that kept the word forbidden out of the black bars and walked across a grid so precise it felt like stepping through graph paper. The base was a cluster of quiet angles bristling in the wind, antennas like insect legs querying a sky that never answered in words. Inside smelled like nylon and tin and tired coffee. Outside was clean the way a sentence is clean when it hides the part that matters. The first night, the sky pressed low, not with weather but with weight, as if the continent itself had been reminded of something it had promised to forget. My roommate, a comms tech from Christchurch with a steady laugh and a private sadness, slept with earbuds in and her boots under the blanket so they wouldn't freeze. I lay awake with my hood cinched so tight I could hear my pulse and bone. There is a sound Antarctica makes when it accepts you for the night, a deep, forgiving hiss. That night it didn't. I could tell you my title: Field Physicist, Anomaly Lead, the one they call when instruments begin to report feelings instead of measurements. But what matters is this: I am trained to listen to numbers until they confess their bad habits. I am not trained for silence that isn't empty. When we went out the second morning to inspect the eastern markers, the air behind my teeth turned metallic. It's a taste, not a flavor, a suggestion that something electrical is considering you. The sky was clear. The sastrugi had been combed by wind into miles of calligraphy. My breath made the old cartoon clouds. And then we heard it. Not heard. Felt. A subtraction of wind. A pause in the white noise. The line. They had erected posts every 50 meters, each capped with a small device shaped like a flattened coin. They looked like cheap sensors. Wind, temperature, maybe a GPS for sled teams. But the metal was wrong. The finish swallowed light in a manner that made my fingertips ache. Static control, our guide said. The air likes to bite. He was lying. You can tell because good liars talk about teeth. Real static makes your hair think about standing. This made your thoughts stop fidgeting. We paced the perimeter, called in benign numbers to reassure the benign people on the other end of the radio. And when we came to the gap where the flags had blown down, the wind slipped back into its old voice and laughed. "Leave it," the guide said too quickly. "We'll fix it after lunch." Or, I said, and I don't know where courage ends and curiosity begins or whether those are just different hats we put on fear. We fix it now. I stepped over the place where the missing flag should have made a line in my head, and the world forgot to breathe. When you cross into a church alone on a weekday, when janitors are real as angels and the candles are burned down to tin, there's a hush that is not made by absence but by attention. The ice had that. The sky had it. Even the tiny motor in my vest's heat pack got shy. I waited for something to happen, and the first thing was stupid. The snow stopped crunching exactly where my boots pressed. I lifted my foot and the imprint filled with the same bright, hard snow as if I had never been there. "Back," the guide said. He didn't shout. Shouting would have offered me a ladder out. He whispered in the tone you use to coax a sleepwalker away from stairs. "Back now." I took another step forward. If you've ever stood in a room where a tuned violin is leaning on a chair and a truck passes a few blocks away, you've seen the string quiver for no reason a human voice could narrate. My bones did that, inside the skull, in the arch of the ribs. Something was singing without air. Not a note, a decision. And because I know the taste of fear mixed with curiosity better than any other drink, I put a glove down and touched the snow. It was warmer by a fraction. Not melted, not wrong. Just closer to the temperature of a memory than to a thing, as if the ice had stopped pretending to be ice long enough to be honest. Afterwards, they told me the fence was an administrative fiction. The official paperwork said a buried generator field below us made the air dangerous to electronics. The truth was simpler and uglier. There is a place on the plateau where direction becomes untrustworthy. Not north-south, not east-west. The other kind. The kind that navigates meaning. The posts weren't sensors. They were a metronome teaching whatever was under us to keep time with the rest of the world. They weren't sending any signals that day. We crossed. There wasn't a vote. There was an agreement that happened a few inches in front of our faces, where breath ghosts and choices first crystallize. I took the lead because the guide's hands were shaking and because the part of me that remembers being a child wanted to know what line the grown-ups had drawn and why. The comms tech followed because she didn't like leaving people alone in strange rooms. The guide came because guilt is a harness. We moved 20 meters, 40, 100, rope between us in bright red loops that looked theatrical against the patient white. The air was so dry you could hear your own eyelids blink. Then the snow ended. Not the field of it, the truth of it. We reached a place where every foot ahead was a foot of seeming. Blue ice, the guide said, because the brain makes up names in self-defense. It wasn't blue. It was the color of a word nobody had used yet. I sat down and took off my glove. I shouldn't have. I know. But the old jokes about licking flagpoles in winter didn't apply here. This was not about sticking. This was about being allowed. My bare hand hovered over Antarctica and asked a question my mouth didn't have the courage to form. The ground agreed. Have you ever felt your own outline adjust? The way a jacket fits better after you shrug hard? The way your back lengthens when someone places a hand there without trying to own you? It was like that. The taste of tin vanished. Sound became truly sound again, with layers. Far wind, near fabric, tiny optic fibers muttering inside machines. I had the sudden, violent conviction that the world was built twice. Once to be looked at, and once to be walked through. Turn around, the guide said. And I would have, I promise. Except something under the snow woke up and began to speak in how a straight line feels when it's been true for a long time. If you ask the James Webb teams in quiet moments, if you catch them without their memos, they will tell you the strangest part of the last few years wasn't the exoplanets that breathed like hot stones, or the black hole that wore its light like a collar. It was the scars. Lines across fields that shouldn't remember, halo to halo, the way a finger dragged through living paint leaves more obedience than mess. The official phrase was instrument artifact. The unofficial phrase that never made it into email was, we're being noticed. I had seen those images in rooms with too many locks. I had lectured to numbers about humility and the difference between significance and the way loneliness amplifies noise. That day, I let the memory of those long, rude lines drift down into my palm, and I understood the fence was never for wind. Beneath the ice, something had traveled. Not recently. Not quick. The way riverbeds remember once the river is gone. The way a corridor remembers once the ritual has moved houses. The forbidden zone wasn't a danger perimeter around a weapon. It was a compromise around a path. We had crossed it, and the path, polite thing that it is, acknowledged us. We set up a tripod because ritual comforts scientists too. We placed a microwave unit obtained through a procurement channel that pretends Area 51 experiment notes are urban legends. Casimir geometry, vacuum pressure tricks. Don't let me bore you with the math. It's a way of asking the nothing between everything to lean in. We tuned it like you tune a throat clearing. When the unit hummed, the ground hummed back, and the rope between us lost a centimeter of slack without moving. Do you feel that? The comms tech whispered. It is important that she whispered because machines do not care about volume, and stillness carries better when respected. The unit's readout was not numbers. It was a line. It drew itself thin and perfect across the blank screen and angled north by a stubborn degree that did not correspond to any grid I trusted. It was pointing somewhere. I knew the math of that angle from a paper I never wrote. An internal memo on the asteroid Atlas impact projections we weren't supposed to call by their code name. Atlas isn't an asteroid, not the dangerous part of it. Atlas is a root, a habit of the void, a pressure that plows, not like a bullet but like a vow. The unit was telling us the path under the ice, and the scar in the sky agreed on direction. The universe had underlined a sentence, and we had put our finger on the underline and said aloud the part of the text that would otherwise have been skimmed. We followed. You know those movies where people go into caves and the camera lies to you about how flashlights work? It wasn't like that. Everything was well lit. The sky stayed stark and honest. We walked across a plain, and the plain homed toward us with tiny adjustments that felt like kindness. Crevasses avoided us. The wind went around. Once the unit faltered, and the rope between us tugged taut in a scold, and the ground ahead scuffed back into being snow with bewildering relief. We waited until the line returned and the world became meaningful again. At a kilometer out, we reached a low place that should not have been there according to map or memory. The surface dipped a meter like a breath taken and held. In the bottom of the dip, the snow had hardened into something that, if you were unkind, you'd call glaze. If you were honest, you'd call door. We didn't knock. We tuned. The hum rose. The rope twitched. The glaze became less glaze and more an answer, a faint change in how it absorbed the daylight. I stepped down. There are thresholds that remember being thresholds, and they treat you accordingly. It yielded the way skin yields around a ring that's been worn a decade. It let the shape of me through because the shape of me was committed. I did not fall. I did not sink. I was translated. I stood for a moment measurable by no clock, in a place that was here and also not where light had rehearsed being here. You are the only person I will say this to and have them not laugh in the wrong register. There was a room under the room. Not a cavity, not a void. A room-shaped decision excerpted from the world to allow a passage without the usual taxes. It smelled like old wind moving through dry stone. It felt like the intention behind a straight line. I understood then the phrase I had always avoided, Antarctica secret base. It exists, but not in the way YouTube thinks. The base is a node on a path. It is a way station for something that passes rarely and leaves manners behind. The posts, the fence, those are not to keep us out. They are to teach us how to pass without being reduced to mistakes. We did not go far. We did not steal. We didn't have to because the world is shockingly generous when you merely listen. Standing there with my hand against the glaze that wasn't, I remembered the James Webb Telescope discovery memos, the ones that called the long galactic scar a non-astrophysical artifact. And then I remembered the brave version, the one somebody wrote and never sent, the truth that tasted like an apology. We are seeing the wake of a decision. We came back with our bodies. I cannot promise all of us returned with our outlines unaltered. The comms tech stopped wearing her earbuds at night. She said music made her homesick for somewhere she hadn't been yet. The guide began to call the wind by a first name and apologize when he needed it to stop. I slept better and worse. Better, because the deep hiss of acceptance returned to the tent and held us. Worse, because I began to hear, between the layers of noise the continent makes like a choir of old radiators, a thin, straight tone that meant yes. They locked down the perimeter within a week. They replaced the posts and reset the metronome. They brought in men with faces like uncut paper and badges that did not cast reflections when you tilted them. They interviewed us separately and together and inside rooms within rooms that smelled like nothing. They used phrases like operational contamination and civilian risk. They never said forbidden. They said off limits as if the difference could hold. I signed more papers. The guide transferred to maintenance and took pleasure in aligning shelves. The comms tech flew home on a quiet flight and sent me a postcard 6 months later. Nothing written on it. Just a bright picture of sun through a church window and a straight colored bar across the pews where the light had insisted on its geometry. I stuck it above my desk and called it calibration reference. You're wondering about consequences, about punishment, about whether the Area 51 experiment crowd came and pried the unit from my hands and told me I saw ice. They did pry. They did say ice. They wore the gravity of people who think secrets keep the dangerous things small. I don't blame them, but I will not agree anymore. Because the aftermath isn't what they feared. No rupture, no event, no catastrophe with a word in front of it and a drone shot to go with it. The aftermath is quieter and, I think, more difficult. Once you've crossed a line drawn to keep meaning from leaking into maps, you begin to notice other lines. In the lab, a radio crackle loses its boredom and learns to lean toward you. In the data, a smear that looked like nonsense becomes a corridor if you tilt your head at the right angle between sleep and waking. In the sky, a tidy field in a near-infrared survey develops a bruise from halo to halo that cannot be unloved back into artifact. When you hear politicians say transparency with their teeth together, you realize they are describing glass, not light. A week after I got back stateside, the private patch on a friend's terminal, don't ask which friend, spit up a series of frames flagged by someone who remembers what honesty costs. A galaxy wearing a ring like a medal. A line as straight as regret crossing it with manners. A dwarf cluster with a similar courtesy. And an empty field that refused to stay empty. The tag on the file was wrong on purpose. Asteroid Atlas impact. Deferred. You only write deferred when you mean inevitable, and we are not ready to say that yet. I will not tell you that the thing under the ice is coming here. That would turn this confession into a pitch for urgency, and urgency is how we ruin the gifts the world gives us slowly. I will tell you what I know. We crossed a line that day, and the line answered not with punishment, but with alignment. We placed a question against the world. The world placed itself under our palm and let us feel the straightness that holds everything crooked together. Maybe Atlas is the name we gave to that straightness because we needed a myth that could carry it. Maybe the impact is not a crash, but the moment a tuning fork persuades a room to agree on a note. We build fences and call them weather. We use words like forbidden, when what we mean is sacred. We paint posts orange and pretend color is an argument. I crossed the line. The line crossed me back. If you ever go, and you might, because the world has a way of arranging errands for those who listen, don't bring a flag. Don't carve your initials into what was generous enough to let you through. Bring a metronome. Bring a question you have rehearsed until it can sit quietly with its hands in its lap. Don't be clever. Be clean. When the wind pauses, accept the pause without asking what you did to earn it. When the ground feels warmer by a fraction, remember that mercy is a temperature too. They will tell you Antarctica's forbidden zone is closed for the season. They will say the James Webb Telescope discovery was a software artifact, that the Area 51 experiment was folklore, that the Antarctica secret base is a conspiracy of bored men and snowcat drivers. They will make a spreadsheet of reasons and laminate it. You and I will keep a different file. Not a report, a memory. The tone inside bone. The line that points without moving. The way the world feels when it remembers it was built twice. I am telling you this in a voice nearly quiet enough to be mistaken for the wind inside a duct, because the truth doesn't need volume to be true. It only needs a room. We made one under the ice, and the ice made one back. If you need a last sentence to hold on to, let it be this. And let it arrive the way a straight bar of light crosses a pew at noon without asking permission. The line we crossed was never a boundary, only a reminder of the other direction. And it's been waiting, patiently and without malice, for us to learn how to walk it.